So it looks like there was about 30 people who registered for this session. So it's always, interesting to see how many people actually come who register. So I don't know how much longer we want to wait because I want to be respectful of everyone's time who is here. What do you think,
I
Chris?
think we can get started, Kelly. That my suggestion is, I mean, we can have people trickle in, but my suggestion
Okay.
is to start with an introduction of all of us here, and
Yeah.
then we can dive in. I personally prefer to keep it very interactive, so hopefully I'm not going to be the person talking.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the positive thing with the smaller group is it can be much more interactive and we can all actually get to know each other and have time to talk.
Yes.
So I like that idea. All
Do
right.
you want to start by talking about the sport group and like a little bit of history, maybe you and Chris, and then dive into the trend talk?
Yeah, perfect. Um, so I'll introduce myself first. Hello, everyone. For those of you don't if you don't know me, I'm Kelly Hickler. I am one of the co-chairs of the interest group, and I also want to introduce. Oh, I made a slide for this. Let me show my slide. There, okay, here we go. Okay, uh, there's me. Hi, and I want to introduce Chris Holler as well, who's the other co-chair, and he is the founder and CEO of Conveo.
Yeah. Hi,
And
everyone.
is there anything that you wanted to say, Chris?
No, happy to be here, and I'll turn it back to you.
All right, sounds good. Um, and then I'll just give a little spiel about the interest group for anyone who's not too familiar with it yet. We do have a website, apacommunityengagement.org. Please check it out. You can become a member. It's open to anyone. You don't have to be an APA member. You don't even have to be a city planner or a professional to join. It's open to everyone. When you do sign up, you get automatically subscribed to a newsletter on Substack. I put the link to it here also, just in case. And then we do have a podcast as well. I shared a screenshot of our YouTube channel, but it's also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you want to listen to it there. And there happens to be Nader there on the screen who was the podcast guest. And and Larry is on the image too. Larry was also a previous podcast guest. So I just want to say on our website we have a lot of resources. We have stories that are shared by our community members. So this is meant to be a truly interactive, participatory group. We're looking for content from our own members. So if you have, feel free to peruse what we have on there. But if you have a success story you'd like to share, if you have a resource, a tool, an event that you want to promote, please send it our way. Put our email here on the screen, but you can also direct or contact us and submit your ideas through the website. So please do so. We're looking for great content. Um, I think that's all I want to say about our group there. So with that, I'll briefly introduce Nader, who is our I guess main presenter of the evening. So or not the evening, sorry. It's evening where I am. I'm in Germany, so it is evening, but for where all you are, afternoon. Um, so this trend talk is a new format that we're trying out. This is the first one, and the idea here, and I'll let Nader talk about it a little bit more too. But the idea is to combine some discussion of trends that are happening in our industry right now, and combine that with some or interactive networking where we can talk through things that we're seeing and we're dealing with and talk to each other and learn from each other about how we're handling those. So the idea is that the first half will be approximately the first half. It's not exact. but Nader can talk about some trends. And since we're such a small group today, we can make it more interactive. We don't have to wait until the second half to talk to each other. I think we can open it up for some interactive discussion. But the intent was for the second half to be more of a unstructured networking time where we could just bring up challenges that we're facing, things that we want to talk through with each other. So that's the idea with our trend talks, and we're open to ideas and feedback as well. If you have ideas for how this could go next time or topics that you'd like to bring up. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Nader. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for introduction and engaging me here. I'm Nader Afzalan. I'm a faculty at UC Berkeley teaching. I'm directing one of our programs, Sustainable Environmental Design, which we offer undergrad program. And also I'm running my firm, which is called The Triangle. It focuses on community impact. I help organizations clarify the metrics of success. What are the things they want to get out of their programs and policies and how to get there? So for example, when you talk about creating job quality, what do you mean by that and how you're going to track it, who should benefit from it by then, and those kind of things. And the same when you talk about equity, environmental justice, etc. Kelly, I understand you suggested to talk about success stories. I'm going to talk about just have a failure conversation. So I badly failed in 2016 when I was invited to give a talk at Zhejiang University in China. Beautiful university. They asked me to talk about my work about big data. And I went there. I gave this fancy talk talking about big data and community engagement, how you can use big data to understand communities' need. And then everyone claps. And after that, the person who invited me said, you know that we don't do community engagement like this in China. That's a different context. And the role of government is even very different from the way you described, which is American context. Thanks so much for coming, but just to let you know that this is a different context. I learned that it's so important to understand the context of participants in the room before giving a talk or having any conversation. So I would love to bring it back to the audience before I start talking, understanding where you're coming from. So if you could just introduce yourself, just your name, affiliation, and why you're here, I would very much appreciate this. So, Larry, do you want to start since we've had a few conversations?
Hey, Nader, father of two, husband of one, assistant professor at UT Austin, focused on kind of the intersection of conflict resolution, consensus building, community engagement, and yeah, happy to be here. Thanks.
Next person on my screen is Nina.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nina. I'm actually a rising second year Master's of City Planning student at Penn. Worked for 5 years in housing and community engagement. Yeah, and very interested in how community engagement can lead to equitable outcomes. So yeah.
Good to meet you, and thanks for being here. I have Kyle on my screen.
Hey, Kyle Metcalf. I work at Conveo with Chris and work with Kelly. So excited to be here and supporting the community engagement interest group. All things digital engagement and figuring out how that plays a role in all of your engagement efforts is really kind of my prime priority. So thanks.
Great to see you, Kyle. On my screen, I have Bill. Can you go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Switek. I'm planner with the Wilmington Area Planning Council in Delaware and do a lot of community engagement with my transportation plans, but I'm always looking for new ideas and ways we can improve.
Great to meet you, and thanks for being here. I have David on my screen. Next.
Hi, folks. David Sells, urban planning consultant with WSP, but also on the APA San Diego section board as the journal coordinator. And I'm interested in some journal content for specifically the intentionality of community engagement. So I can only stay, unfortunately, for the next 15 minutes, but hopefully I can get some good content and information and ideas. So thank you.
Thanks for being here, David. I worked the technology division of APA National. I believe I was there after Chris because Chris played the same role as the chair. Getting content is not always easy, so I feel you. Thanks for being here. I have Emily next.
Hi guys, my name is Emily Johnson. I'm a former landscape architecture. I got my master's in planning and now I'm actually working at Maptionaire. So I'm a bit wearing a similar hat as Kyle today, where I am kind of trying to get more involved with the conversation. I'm interested in map-based community engagement and digital community engagement, community engagement. So mostly just listening in today, but excited to see how this goes.
Great to meet you, Emily, and thanks for joining. I see John on the screen.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is John Demko, and I just graduated with a master's in urban environmental planning from Arizona State University. And thank you. And I decided to hop on this session because I understand that community engagement is a cornerstone to planning.
Thanks, John, and great to have you. I see Tanya on the screen. I do not know if Tanya is.
Hi, I'm Tanya Sanders Tack. I'm an associate professor of city and regional planning at Morgan State University. I actually logged on because I actually teach studio courses at Morgan. And so we do a lot of community engagement through our studio courses. And even some of my lecture courses, I have a kind of community-facing component to it. So I want to make sure I stay up on the latest and greatest in community engagement.
Fabulous. Great to have you, Tanya. I do have Rhea on the screen.
Yes. Hi. My name's Riya Singhi. I work at a boutique firm in Jersey City called Mercer Planning Associates. We do a lot of community engagement, particularly catered towards transportation planning. Yeah, just wanted to check out what this was about. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Rhea, and sorry I mispronounced your name initially. Great to have you here. I'm going to dive into some of the trends that I personally see. I'm just one person, and I'm going to talk about these based on my experience, mainly in California, and based on an experience that I have started interviewing folks across the world in the past 2-3 months about their experiences in designing impactful programs. So I'm going to borrow some thoughts based on those interviews about designing impactful programs, because some of them are also talking about community engagement. But a lot of California focus, which means that I might be completely wrong. I would love to hear from, especially others who are outside of California, which I believe most of you are. So one thing that I'm seeing happening in my day-to-day is some sort of shift from focusing on engagement no matter what to focusing on impact. And the old model that was, let's engage folks early on and making sure that people are quote unquote engaged, regardless of what that engagement means, is sometimes being replaced in a good way. And I believe that's for good. With figuring out why we're engaging people, and do we even need to engage folks? What is the main impact that we want to get? What is the main outcome we want to get? For example, do we want to engage people to build trust? Do we want to engage people to understand their priorities? Do we want to engage people to learn from local knowledge and incorporate it into our plan and policies? Whether the process of engagement is important or like the ultimate outcome, I see this trend of focusing on the thing we want to get out of engagement rather than just doing engagement at every cost. There is a legislation being proposed in California that actually allows local jurisdictions not to do public engagement at certain phases of planning process. And I actually like the idea and I personally support it. In many cases in California, we have been quote unquote, engaging community without providing sufficient resources for them, for example, childcare, compensation, etc. And the result was that there were a few people who had self-interest and power. They would go to the meeting and then we on the planning side, we would just stamp it, say that we did public engagement. And the result of the engagement was just hearing over and over and over again from those particular people who were shaping these ideas. Sometimes we as planners even have been engaging people and asking folks to talk about FAR or floor area ratio, where people were not even interested in the topic or not even being an expert to talk about like FAR details. That way of engagement has been resulting in, I believe, misuse of planning processes sometimes, or not really supporting planning processes in a way that's inclusive and supportive of different interest groups. So I'm going to pause. I would love to have a conversation about this. There's other trends that I see as well, but I'm going to pause and see if there is any reflection on this particular topic of focusing on the thing we want to get out of engagement rather than just doing engagement no matter what.
Now, this, Larry, can I jump in?
Yes, and I just want to also say that this is not something that everyone supports. So it's a contentious topic, but yes, please go ahead, Larry.
Well, first of all, I'll try to find it and put it in the chat, but there was a fascinating article in Governing Magazine that touched upon some of what you just talked about in terms of the way in which, public participation happens in planning and especially in zoning. I mean, I think that the challenge that we continue to face in some respects is that, I don't think much of the world and the planning world in particular recognizes, public participation as a profession or as a field of work with expertise, even though, within the last decade, there are now authentic certifications, that you can earn in that space. And so, with that comes, I think, a lack of awareness around standards and around best practices and around, any nuance in, what it means to invite public input. And so, it tends to be it still, I think, is very word of mouth as compared to something that people feel compelled to understand by virtue of either local, state, federal law or professional standards or some combination. And I think until I'm not directly advocating for new law per se, but I mean, I do think that it will take something like that to encourage the various professions who may need public engagement to then up their game, because in the absence of that, they're likely not to understand what I think a lot of us on this call understand, which is that there's enormous ROI, return on investment, from doing public engagement beyond just the normative value of well, we should, in a democracy, do that. We avoid a bunch of costs that doing poor or not doing public engagement can incur, but I don't think that that's something that's very well understood at all. So sorry for the soapbox there.
Thank you. And I see Chris.
Yeah, sort of one
Sure, he has a
aspect
lot to talk about IP too.
that. Well, so, one facet maybe that I would like to add to what you mentioned is that came up in a lot of our prior session, and it interestingly came up almost in all of them, is that sort of problem of engagement fatigue. So it is good to engage and to engage a lot and do it by the right means. but we need to be careful to do it in a way that we don't sort of lose the audience, right? If there's too many projects at the same time and we ask too much at some point, I think the public might, not understand why this is the time to engage in a certain project, or might get confused, or, et cetera. So I think there was a lot to that, and multiple people kind of spoke to that. And I think that definitely kind of ties into that, I believe. Nina.
Last time out there. Yeah, I think my urge when I is to step back a little bit and understand, like, we're trying to get to the bottom of what good engagement is. And clearly this is an effort at honing, approaching a community with respect and intent, because engagement fatigue is often also, and lost trust, that we know bad engagement can harm community relationships and can actually act in contrast to what it set out to do. It makes me, maybe this is just the practical side of my brain, but it does, to Chris, to your point, makes me think about the systems and incentives in place in order to ensure that intentionality actually follows through in terms of this good engagement. Do we have the systems in place? And it could be municipality by municipality or consultant by consultant, but is this shift towards outcomes paired with increased, entity capacity for ensuring transparency with follow through? Are we also adjusting how departments work with each other, how we're collaborating with each other? Are we becoming more transparent in the way that we affect change? And are we working with the community over longer periods of time? I just wonder, is this attempt at honing in on engagement that might be a little bit more thoughtful, is that paired with increased capacity for implementing that yielded engagement? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of where my hand is are we going to follow through? Right. It's a good start, but that's what I wonder.
Nina, I'm actually very curious. Thanks so much. It sounds like I'm hearing both from you and Larry about maybe we need standard solutions, or just something to guide this process for a good practice versus not a good practice. Do you have any suggestions for how to do that? Is IAP2 has been trying to do, what does that stand for?
International Association
Chris,
of Public Participation, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. So IAP2 has been around for a while, and they've been developing toolkits and guidelines, but it's still, we are struggling to do good public engagement. Do you have any suggestions for how to do it? And Emily, we're going to come back. I see.
Yeah.
Well,
I think I've been thinking a lot these days about power and incentives. And I think community engagement and public participation often has a soft skills connotation, but I actually think practitioners and believers of community engagement and public participation, I think we should be equipping ourselves better to navigate systems of power and navigate incentives within local government, because that's the sphere that I'm most familiar with. But when you think about where the results of engagement go, they're being handled by public servants or being handled by practitioners, and then subsequently politicians, in order for change to be enacted. And I think that being standards are great, but how do we, and this is just an open question, if I had the answer, I probably wouldn't be in school. These are, how do we navigate these systems in a way where there's an imperative, right? That's what I've been sitting with recently. And it's just kind of an opening up of that question where, we're familiar with plans that sit on shelves, right? Everybody probably on this call has worked on something that has not come to fruition. And maybe that had engagement as a component, and we told everybody. And this is also from my own experience. You make a lot of soft promises and then nobody ever hears from it ever again. And I think it's a larger problem in planning that engagement is emblematic of. But I think focusing on intergovernmental collaboration, on planners being more well-versed in navigating the systems of power that they're in, learning how to leverage incentives and kind of be a little bit more of a force. And as a planner, you're speaking for constituencies as much as you're working with them. And speaking as somebody who's currently getting an education in it, I think organizational dynamics play a lot more of a role than I first thought, at least.
That's a great point you're making, I think, based on what we as planners and institutions do with the data that we collect, with the relationships we build, with the trust we build. What happens? We do things. What do we do with that in the end? And I think that's key. Emily, do you want to just jump in?
Yeah, I guess my comments dragged behind a bit, but I do really sympathize with this thought on the good ROI, but it has to be good engagement, because if you just keep requiring mediocre engagement, uninfluential, unimpactful engagement, you might as well get rid of it if it's not doing anything. But I would love to see actually some kind of standards. Again, I don't necessarily have all the answers, but at least like in Finland where I'm based now, instead of abandoning a kind of semi-functional public participation system, they were like, okay, well, we need to find solutions. And here, digitizing community engagement has been a huge boon for the small country of Finland. But I'm really interested to see kind of what standards make sense in different contexts. China's got to do it different. US has to do it different.
Thanks for sharing, Emily. Anyone else has reflections? And I see notes from Larry and Nina in the chat.
And I'd say, different standards for different communities in the US and in other countries as well, because I've worked in communities where we can do online engagement and you get 100% participation, but then there's communities you get 10% participation. So you need to do door-to-door surveying. So yeah, I think that it has to be flexible to the different communities and demographics you're working with. One thing that I see like right off the bat is the public hearing process is very problematic. Because in that article, Larry, that you dropped in, there's the microphone. And just imagine what percentage of people are actually comfortable getting up to a microphone and talking in front of 100 people. Not too many. So I think, Nader, that gets kind of to your point that just you're getting an echo chamber of voices instead of a broad distribution.
Yes, I see that point, and Emily's point about the fact that we can't eliminate the process by saying that it's not working. I mean, I also like the idea of coming up with solutions to do it right. At the same time, I worked for the state of California for 5.5 years. Most recently in the governor's office. Sometimes you're just running so fast and you are under a lot of political pressure to engage the public. Sometimes I feel and I believe not engaging is better than quick engage, like very rushed engage. I do not know. I would love to hear from you guys as well, because I try to communicate this in our team, but in a political environment, it's really hard not to engage, especially in California. And my rationale was like, we are here to serve the public. If this engagement is not serving them, do we need to do it or not? But I would love to. I would love to talk about this for a second. I see nods, but I don't see anyone accepting or challenging. It's a conversation to be had still. Kelly.
Well, I'll jump in for a second. In my consulting work, I work with so many clients where I am asked, or I like to ask for copies of previous engagement, like survey results that are related to what we're working on. And I'll look at it and I'll go, okay, well, what happened with this? What was the outcome? And it's like, oh, well, nothing really happened with it, but they want to engage more. We want to do another survey. And I'm like, okay, but you're really doing a disservice with your relationship building with your community if you already did a survey and you did nothing with that, and then you're going to ask them to do another survey. Why would they take the survey? So I agree with that sentiment of, well, maybe we don't need to do more engagement. Why don't we follow through on the engagement we already did? That's my
I see a lot of nods, and Emily, it's 100%. Thank you. Ria.
So I just want to jump on both the points and say yes. I think one is that we need to see how prior engagement has yielded results and sort of also in terms of altering the plans if you're engaging with the same community? Like if you had a survey with them already, do you need another survey? What can you extract from what you have already? But also it's about sometimes some of the same voices come through over and over, and it's like it's the same people advocating for the same things in the community, which leads to overrepresentation sometimes of the same thoughts within a project, which I get what they are doing, but there should be a way to cut the repetition. And I feel like in that case, it's kind of important to see how much and to what extent do you want to engage. Um, in a lot of our projects that we do here, we try to engage with some of the ground initiatives. And that way we just engage with one of the persons at the organization, and they kind of get back to us with all sorts of things that people said. And this way we get more representation in terms of people from diverse communities. Um, but that's, yeah, just I do agree that sometimes it's not just about doing engagement for the heck of it, just ticking a box rather than actually seeing what it can actually do.
Thanks, Ria. I think just the issue of diversity is real, and just hearing over and over again from one person is something that we need to fix. Thanks for sharing. I have John and then Larry.
Building on the what Kelly talked about remind me about an its very recent experience that I had when going for my MEP degree. And so I so in Phoenix my team worked with the city to identify strategies to help South Central Phoenix residents or residents of a certain community to stay in place and be able to enjoy the benefits of two community investments coming there. And what the city of Phoenix did express that they noticed that at least some of the local residents have experienced something called engagement fatigue, which means that they have been talked to so many times. So then they recommend to us that we instead take a targeted approach to community engagement. But I'm sure that could also tell signs that maybe, again, follow up on the existing community engagement or even just stop doing it.
Yeah, thanks, John, for sharing that. Engagement fatigue is serious, and it's interesting that we are hearing it over and over again. Larry.
Apologies, I switched to mobile and I'm driving. But one of the things I think we can't overlook here is, the planners and the planning profession deserve, in my opinion, to have sort of an unfettered lane through which they convey their expertise and their expert opinion. And so when we put the burden and the onus of responsibility on planners to also oversee and facilitate public involvement, which at times can be diametrically opposed to their opinions as planners, I think we impose a really unfair burden onto them and make them, either water down their expertise or mute it until, it come time for like the staff recommendation, and then the public is surprised by it. So, when I worked at the city of Austin, my role was always separate from the planning department, even though I was assisting them, because I think it took a certain amount of neutrality, a certain amount of independence, for me to be able to facilitate those conversations, and the planners then to be able to provide, not just what their education taught them, but what the plans, previous plans say and laws say. And so I just think we have to ask ourselves, like, if the objective is high quality engagement, should that necessarily be put upon the planners themselves, the planning departments, or should they sort of articulate what input they're hoping for and then entrust other, whether internal or external professionals, helping them collect that information? Because that is an awesome responsibility and one that I think puts them in an uncomfortable.
That's a great point, Larry. Thanks. And I think it's why we are seeing, for example, some of these changes in California about certain types of engagement when it comes to details of, for example, zoning. I mean, you could ask, for example, the public to share their interest, knowledge, local knowledge about their neighborhood and environment, but not necessarily how much FAR they think makes sense to put in their community if they don't have understanding the whole neighborhood and also zoning regulations and everything. I think it should be relatable in some way that they understand, community understand, and then can tap into their local knowledge in a way that it's helpful to planners to make plans. Kyle.
Yeah, no, I think that raises kind of an interesting point. Asking planners to facilitate engagement, as opposed to looping in maybe a communications department. And I think, the point on what are we getting feedback on is an important thing to ask. Also, I think the process is important to keep in mind, right? If you don't have the communications people at the table when you're coming up with, okay, here's the project time frame, right? Here's what we're trying to accomplish at points in time. When are we trying to incorporate feedback and on what topics? I feel for the communications people that probably oftentimes get brought in last minute saying, hey, we're going to do this, this, and this. And, it's part of that process. And then they don't really get to prepare for it. But also the way that they engage in terms of spreading information, positive or negative, that's coming out of that municipality, I think is far different than going out and seeking feedback on something on a specific project, right? I think that it's various different modes of communication, which is why I'm sure at some point, right, the argument was that the planning team wasn't happy with the engagement from the communications team, and then therefore the communications team punted it back to the planning team, right? And it said, okay, well, you guys can do your own engagement then, and then, right, it all just kind of points the finger at. But, I think to the point of, what resources are available to the planning team at what time, what do you do internally? What do you seek outside consultants to do? But I think, ultimately it stems right from the question of what do we actually need to do engagement on? What do people want to engage with? How do they want to be engaged with? And I think that's a very critical question that can be asked at every step, along the way, as opposed to, yes, we're going to do engagement. It's let's ask that question along each step in the road, as opposed to, up front and have it be rubber stamped across the process.
Thanks, Kyle. You're making a great point about organizational capacity of what is the goal? What is it you want to really get out of this process? What are the things that you have in hand? What's your timeline? How many people are available to facilitate this process? If you're using an online platform that requires a lot of facilitation, do you even have someone to come in and facilitate? If not, maybe you need to use a different method. I think we had a great conversation around this topic. The other theme or trend that I keep seeing and hearing, which is not new, but it's, I think, very important, is an ongoing relationship building, which is not that you are, for example, doing downtown revitalization, let's do community engagement. Now we are doing bike share planning, let's engage the community. Oh, we have this idea about doing some a new design along the river, let's engage the community to figure out what they want to do. Instead, and it's actually, this is coming up in a lot of interviews that I'm having with colleagues in Europe, that it sounds like organizations have been building some sort of system to have continuous engagement process. And then they use that system and process to engage the public whenever it comes to thinking about new plans and policies. So it's not one-off engagements, it's like a continuous process. And they actually even started before even thinking about this new bike share program that requires public engagement. I would love to hear your, not only your thoughts, but if you've seen it being done correctly. I think we could do a much better job of doing this kind of continuous trust building and engagement in California, but for some reason, I haven't seen it being done much. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked with the Citizens Planning Institute, which is under the Planning Commission in the city of Philadelphia. And it's a really interesting model that I wanted to share, where they have cohorts of just residents that sign up for essentially both a city planning, civic education, and kind of exposure to the world of Philadelphia course over a semester or two, and it's free, and they're able to this cohort of residents. Some of folks are involved in their communities, some are not, but they're able to become educated in all manners of planning in Philadelphia, and they're given language and context around why things are the way that they are. And quite frequently, this program has scaled and seen a lot of success in having them serve as essentially representatives in the community, where we've seen a lot of growth in subsequent community organizations growing from these graduates of the cohorts, where they are connected to the city and are growing their own organizations within the city of Philadelphia. But I thought that was a really interesting way. Urban Planning Academy. Yeah, exactly. It's a really interesting way to invite residents in who are interested and make it accessible to them. And of course, there is still room for scale, and how do you engage a larger population in general. The partnership model has also been very successful for CPI. But now we're updating our comprehensive plan in Philly, and CPI is kind of at the heart of it because they have so many representatives and liaisons within the community that are already aware of the processes, and that have roots in community. And so it's kind of like a trickling up effect of engagement that the city is trying to leverage. And I just think it's kind of cool.
Fascinating. Nina, do you know who is keeping this community alive?
It was kind of me at one point, but yeah, it's the city. Yeah, it's it's funded separately, but it's still within the Planning Commission. So they're able to collaborate both with planners and with comms.
It was fascinating. If you have a link, that would be great.
Yeah, I will absolutely drop it in.
Fabulous. Emery.
Yeah, I'm thinking again of Finland here, where it's pretty much the norm for publicly led, local government led ongoing engagement. And it's not always some specific program. One example that is a specific program is a annual participatory budgeting program that a lot of the cities here do. I can think of at least 5 cities here that do that regularly every year. But also just sort of you do it and you do it well and you do it often. It just sort of becomes the culture or the expectation, and to expect just a nice high quality survey or activity every now and then, and kind of motivating to participate because that it's going to be good and then they're going to use the results.
Emily, so it's when you're talking about annual participatory budget, but do you know who is who's been joining? What's been the type of programs or policies kind of involved in this?
Yeah, I can think the capital city here, Helsinki, has, I think it's just called My Helsinki. I can find the link to it in a minute. But it's just organized by the local government, and I think it's the planning department that does it. And they have I think they have their own self-made digital platform, but a bunch of cities use different platforms. Some of them use Optionaire. And it just collects a bunch of ideas from citizen, or even just any resident. Anyone who lives there can submit ideas, and there's a voting and commenting system, and then it's completely citizen led. But I'm not sure of the policy details of how that was implemented.
Right.
From
but that's fascinating. So it's sorry, didn't want to interrupt. But
No, please.
that's it's public it's like a public platform that everyone can go in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's sort of like it has its initiation period at the beginning of the round, and then it goes through the steps, and then it kind of closes, and the winners are announced, and the plans are implemented, and then the next year, I think they start it all over again.
That's interesting. Thank you. Tanya.
So
see
I
your
want
hand
to
raised.
Hey, so again, so I'm at a university, so it's not very different, but I want to talk about a little bit of a different context. So we often talk about co-designing with communities, and so right now we're doing a research project. Again, it relates, but just follow me for a second. We're doing a research project in neighborhoods in Baltimore where we're co-designing the research with the community. So we started with a steering committee that was broad-based. So it was neighborhood residents as well as institutional folks. So like the Baltimore City Office of Sustainability, DPW, others who are in the sustainability space. And we as researchers would come to them with our research questions and kind of have them vet them because we wanted to make sure those research questions were kind of germane to and of interest to the community, right? Because this is very much an applied research project. So I'm saying this all to say the steering committee is kind of one of those overarching participatory ways in which the research is happening. And then we've established a community engagement liaison, and she does a lot of the science education in the neighborhood with community groups. And then we're trying to stand up our citizen science kind of arm. And again, that would allow community residents to come out and take measurements and things in the field with the climate scientists and things like that. So they're learning how the climate scientists, take the data, whether that's with weather stations or if they're doing some core boring, like the vegetation and soils group, or if they're with the water group, then they're of course going to test the waters, and particularly when we have like a overflow that happened after a rainstorm or something like that. So I say that out to say it's a whole ecosystem of community engagement and various levels of community engagement. And the community has been with us since the writing of the grant that was submitted to the Department of Energy. Do you know what I mean? Like we had community partners in on that grant. So translating that into community engagement that relates directly to planning, I do think it needs to be more like what you were talking about earlier, that long-term engagement with neighborhoods, with communities, that isn't just a one and done, or even in the beginning, we come and we do the engagement, then we come back and, because we always talk about circling back and letting them know what happened, but it might not be that long engaged process with them. And I think that's kind of where we need to be. And I like what you said before about having outcomes based on your engagement. So like, well, what are we doing engagement for? Well, again, with the BSEC, I was referring to the Baltimore Social Environmental Collaborative Process project, which we call BSEC. But with that, it really is to make sure that the community is able to take the data that's being generated and then being able to advocate for themselves for what they need. Given that our climate is warming and we have climate change and all these other things. So I really do feel like as planners, we can take from that in the sense that what we're doing in neighborhoods does need to be co-designed with the community, and it's not a one and done. It's not a checkbox. It's not a see them in the beginning and then we do the ribbon cutting at the end. It's not that type of thing. It really does need to be a full through line.
Tanya, thanks so much for the example which connects both the planning process, citizen science, and also researchers. I have a question on this part of co-designing with community. Like I think in San Francisco you try to co-design, but then things like NIMBYism shifts the focus toward a certain way of designing and planning, and then you have homelessness, affordability issue, crazy traffic, etc. I'm really trying to understand how this co-designing should happen in a way that it's not reflecting a particular community user interest?
Yeah, no, and
I
I,
mean, no, I don't have an answer, but
yeah, and I
would
didn't.
love
I
to
hope I
hear
didn't
if
make
you
it seem
thought.
like that was an easy process because it was not. I mean, we had a lot of boots
No,
along the way.
no,
So,
of course.
but I agree with you because, like here in Maryland, particularly because I'm in Montgomery County, our county council just passed legislation that would help produce more missing middle housing. And there was an article that came out, and the photographer caught a really good picture of a lot of boomers in the audience booing when they were passing this legislation for more missing middle housing, because it again they live their whole lives here and they like the low density in the areas. They like their large lots and things like that. So they're concerned for young families or, college graduates needing housing in a very expensive county. They're a little, they have blinders on. So I do understand that, we do need to address the naysayers, the NIMBYism in the crowd. I don't know that I had the exact answer because we we had to, every step of the way, just kind of figure out a way to overcome even some of the naysayers and in our own camp. So it's just a process. I don't have I don't have a really good solution.
Thanks for sharing. Emily.
I think when you have co-design with NIMBYism, this is one of the best use cases when taking it digital or taking it online. Really levels the playing field instead of having a room where the people who show up start shouting, or instead of having a bunch of tables where there's kind of power dynamics going on. I mean, those kinds of conversations are also good and bring their own perspective, but having one part of the engagement where you can just sort of just put out your opinion, have a level playing field, and also associate your kind of proposed solution with some basic demographics information. What neighborhood are you from? And then as a planner, you can look at that data and say, okay, everyone from this neighborhood seems to be wanting this one thing, and everyone from this neighborhood or this demographic wants another thing. And it really puts into perspective so much more than just like coming home from a workshop with a map that has marker on it. You really know who wants what are the conflicts, what are the tensions, and you can break it down and do something useful with it.
Emily, I very much like this idea of understanding who is proposing what and what kind of interest the process is representing. Do you have any thoughts about the identification of data? Because in some planning processes, planners are trying to make the process anonymous in a way that everyone who is comfortable to talk, they can share their thoughts and ideas. I'm personally leaning more toward gathering information as much as we can so that we understand the things that you talked about. But I want to hear your thoughts about anonymized participation.
Yeah, it's always on a case-by-case basis, but I think there's nothing that lowers this threshold quite so much as not having to put your personally identifiable information there. We've seen a lot of our people who use Maptionary, for example, who have done required info and non-required info, and the results are really clear that when you don't require an email or a phone or personal address, or especially like a login, something like that is super high threshold. It makes it much easier for people to participate. So from just like a lowering the threshold perspective, I'm definitely pro anonymity. I cannot say that word. But I think it is really important to, when the project calls for it, gather some kind of demographic information that's relevant for you, whether it's a campus and you want to know who's a teacher, who's a student, whatever it might be. That's important.
Thank you.
I think the conversation has moved on for what I was going to chime in on the co-design. I also know that we're getting to the end, so I think I'm going to hold off on that.
I'll just put one trick I use. It's location based. Like I'll ask, what's the nearest intersection or what neighborhood do you live in? If I offer a gift card with a survey, about half the people well, at least half will go for it. And then you got their address. So you can map that and figure out some pretty good idea of who you're talking to.
Right. Well, I had one other trend to talk about, which we don't have time for, which was, of course, focused on the big elephant in the room, the AI. But I'm going to bring it back to Chris and Kelly. This was a great conversation, engaging, and I personally learned a lot. So thanks so much for Kelly and Chris to engage me and invite me for this session. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Nader. That was an awesome discussion. Thank you for leading that. And thank you to all of the participants for being so thoughtful in your questions and your answers, your responses. I think it's nice to have a smaller group like this, so everyone really has a chance to get to talk. I'm gonna put our contact info on the screen one more time here. And I will share the presentation online as well, probably sometime next week or two. But yeah, please subscribe to our newsletter, join the interest group if you haven't already. Then you'll get the summary and the recording of this meeting. And we'll do another one of these. Let's see, I guess it will be August, September, October. Is that right, Chris? Who will be the
Yeah, I
next?
think so.
Yeah.
That
So-
would be sort of once a quarter, also with the intent, I think we may have not mentioned that, these trend talks ultimately leading hopefully to somewhat of a publication towards the end of the year. As Nader mentioned, there's other topics, AI being obviously a big one, and things maybe that we'll find time to focus on next time. And the idea was, and I think Nader, you were even the originator of that idea, to bring that all together into something that we can maybe share at the end of the year as sort of, ideas that came up and trends, sort of broader trends that came up in these conversations as we facilitate them over the course of the year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you all
thanks.
thought of the AICP credit for this as well? That might be another draw for others.
Yes, we have looked into that. Since we're just an interest group, we can't offer AICP credits. We'd have to become a division. So if we end up going that route, if we get enough members and interest, then we can look into that. Or we could partner with a division or another chapter who they could offer the AICP credit. So that might be another opportunity as well. We can look into that for sure. All right, we're right at the hour. So thank you so much, Nader. Again, thank you everyone for participating, and we'll hope to see you on the next webinar. All right, bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.